The time has come for the 2019 Summer Family Get-Together, this time held in Newport, Oregon. From Parker, we drove to Newport in 3 days, stopping the first night in Ogden, Utah, and the second night in John Day, Oregon. Bright and early on the morning of July 5th, we left Parker and headed north on I-25 to the Wyoming border. There we transferred to I-80 and headed west. Soon we spotted an off-ramp named after our oldest grandson, and we took the off-ramp to the adjacent rest stop where we enjoyed a view of these wild flax. Later in the day, in western Wyoming, we stopped for ice cream at Little America, and Eileen looked a little puzzled with her good fortune for a while, but figured out what to do with it. Entering Utah, we soon switched to I-84 and headed to our night's rest in Ogden. That evening, in our Ogden motel, Eileen prepared a dinner of shrimp, rice, and Brussels sprouts. On Saturday, July 6th, we continued north and then west on I-84 through Utah. We continued north and west on I-84 as we traveled through Idaho and reached the border of Oregon at Ontario, Oregon. In Oregon, we abandoned I-84 for US 26, which we took west to John Day, but we made a short detour to the ghost town of Whitney, as shown in green. The town of Whitney was established by a lumber company in 1900, and the lumber company built a mill just south of town. However, this burnt down in 1918, and the town began to decline from its peak population of 150. By 1947, the railroad which connected the town to the outside world abandoned it, and the town has been pretty much in decline ever since. And that's a house that's still being lived in. As is this one over here. But this house is clearly unoccupied. This one is apparently owned, but it doesn't look like anyone lives there. That evening in the small town of John Day, Eileen attended the Saturday vigil at the tiny St. Elizabeth of Hungary church. In the morning, we took US 26 west to Prineville, then we switched to Oregon 126 and took that to Sisters. There we got off on a small road, Oregon 242, and detoured to see the D. Wright Observatory. We followed 242 until it rejoined 126, and then we took that to Eugene. From Eugene we took I-5 north to Corvallis, where we picked up US 20 and took that to Newport and our rental house. About 40 miles west of John Day, we entered Picture Gorge. This is the John Day River, and as we turn this way, it enters what's called Picture Gorge, which is extremely narrow. Rocks on both sides, and there are supposedly Indian pictoglyphs along these banks here. This is a look east back behind the gorge, and this is the beginning of the gorge itself. Approaching the town of Sisters on Oregon 126, we got this view of the Three Sisters peaks, each of which exceeds 10,000 feet. Then over here to the south is Broken Top Mountain, which exceeds 9,000 feet. We're in a turnout on Oregon 242, and we're looking right here at Belknap Crater. Over here to the east of that is Mount Washington, a rather spectacular peak. Between us and these peaks is a large lava field which came from Belknap Crater, and there is also a number of burnt trees from a recent forest fire. Over here a bit to the east is a view of what I believe is Mount Jefferson, but it may be Mount Hood. I'm not really sure. Well, here from the summit, Mackenzie Summit, we are at the D. Wright Observatory, which we'll see in a minute. It's behind me, but here we get a nice little view of two of the sisters off to the south. Here, as we turn to the north, we see the D. Wright Observatory built by the CCC in the Depression. Standing atop the D. Wright Observatory, one can do a 360-degree pan and see this volcano-devastated area. There's Route 242, and there's the sisters. Standing inside of the observatory, one finds that the windows frame various peaks around the area. This is Mount Washington, and this is the Three Sisters, or the two of the Three Sisters that one can see from here. Moving west on Route 242 from the D. Wright Observatory, one can find a Forest Service road that leads in a mile to Scott Lake, seen here. Along the shore, there's a profusion of these rather pretty wildflowers. Getting our fill of these wonders of nature, we packed ourselves into the car and went on to Newport. We found our rental house to be in a rather pretty setting. This is the view from the back deck of the house. We can see the Pacific Ocean out here right across 101. 101 is pretty much hidden from our view by those trees below us. Looking down into the backyard, we find that there's a certain amount of statuary down there. But the real calling card still remains the view of the ocean. Monday turned out to be a beautiful day, and the entire family went to the Yaquina Head Lighthouse north of Newport. This was built in 1873 and today is fully automated so that no one mans it and people only come there when the computer calls to say that there's a need for maintenance. The hillsides around the lighthouse were covered with wildflowers. Behind the lighthouse, there's a viewing platform at which the family gathered to gaze at the rocks beyond. Off the end of the head where the lighthouse is behind us, is this rock with all of these birds on it. The rocks also contained some seals, which we watched move around a little bit while they were sunning themselves. Em was clearly in her 8th month of pregnancy, but when we looked down and saw the tidal pools below, she was quick to join with the rest of the family to get down there and admire the wonders of the shallow pools. We saw sea urchins, red crabs, and starfish. This is a sea slug. Feels kind of spongy. If you look carefully, you can see some small fish moving in the water. The fish natural coloring makes them almost impossible to see unless they move. And here, to round out and complete our visit to Yaquina Head, we see some small fish and hermit crabs. The next day was sort of drizzly. We began the day with some whale watching out of the living room window, and then went on to the Hatfield Aquarium. Taking a break from seeing fish, the boys seemed to enjoy a video of Aunt Jen's hamsters. Later in the day, Chaz and Em seemed somewhat perplexed by a comparison of their conditions. After dinner, the family engaged in a rainy watermelon seed spitting contest. On the morning of the 10th, while Em and James went to breakfast to celebrate the anniversary of their first date, the rest of us took a walk down to the beach. While Chaz and Jen took a long beach walk and disappeared into the mists, the rest of us checked out the beach and the ocean and decided to opt for building sandcastles. Then we returned to the house and cleaned up. In the evening, Bob topped off a wonderful meal with a bottle of 1967 port. Thursday the 11th was the last day of our get-together, and it was a beautiful morning. The Shamrells were happy about their impending parenthood, and the entire family was jumping for joy over the prospect of having a sister. Then it was time for the great water balloon fight of 2019. In the afternoon, we returned to the beach, enjoying our last day, a beautiful day in Newport.
Stronger.
Well, we've walked a pretty good piece down the beach, and there's just nobody basically here. We're back beyond where you can really see clearly is where we started. It's pretty empty beach.
And then the 2019 summer family get-together was at an end. On the morning of Friday the 12th, we posed for our usual departure picture with the grandchildren and then left for our return to Parker. On our return trip, we followed the route that we'd used coming in, with two exceptions shown in red on this map. First, we took a short detour to the top of Mary's Peak, and then once we got to Corvallis, we continued on to Sisters on US 20, avoiding the detour through the mountains that we used when we saw the Wright Observatory. Mary's Peak Road took us to within about 3/4 of a mile of the peak itself. Then from the parking lot, this rather steep trail led all the way to the peak. The side of the trail was graced by several rather unusual wildflowers. First, there was this orange, rather tall flower. And second, there was this rather pretty red flower, which was fairly low. We've come to the top of Mary's Peak, the tallest mountain in the coastal range at 4,097 feet. On a very clear day, you can see, looking east as we are doing now, the row of volcanoes in the Cascades, but it not being that clear today, we don't have that view.
Then if we continue to sort of pan off here now, this is the north, and now we're looking west, or looking in a westerly direction, and the ocean fog is still there. On a really clear day, they say, you can see the ocean off this way and the range of the Cascades the other. And that brings us back to the peak. Now the path has blue spruce lining it as we're heading back down the trail to the parking lot.
On Saturday, we drove from John Day to Ogden, exactly retracing our steps of our outgoing trip. And we arrived in Ogden in time for Eileen to attend the Saturday night vigil at St. Joseph's Church. And on Sunday, July 14th, we again exactly retraced our steps of our westbound journey and followed the long road back through Wyoming to Parker.